The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is, wherever you're watching this webinar. Thank you very much for taking the time to join this webinar arranged by Sporting Bounce around boosting your online presence and helping clients find your sports psychology services. Sporting Bounce is a global directory of sports psychology consultants, and the main way in which Sporting Bounce helps the individuals who advertise their services on the directory is through being found online, and that's done through Google AdWords, paid advertisements, but also through organic searches online where people will type in to find a sports psychologist near them, and that search will direct them to the directory sportingbounce.com. My name is Mark Jones, and on behalf of Sporting Bounce, it's a pleasure to be able to spend some time just to share with you some of the things that I've learned certainly over the last 18 months to 2 years, some of the tips, some of the tricks. We're definitely still learning, there's no two ways about that, but certainly come a long way in terms of understanding the best approaches to boosting your presence online and promoting the services that you offer, putting yourself in front of more clients, more potential clients, and boosting your sports psychology business. In terms of this webinar, this is a brief overview. It's a gloriously incomplete overview of everything you would need to know in terms of boosting your online presence. But it's a very brief overview. Some of this will be very basic and very simple, and if it looks pretty simple to you, apologies for that, but we're going to start sort of from the ground up. If it is very simple, you may very well have stopped watching by now, in which case that comment was perhaps somewhat irrelevant. But we'll talk about why having a presence online matters, how to get found on Google, some of the key assumptions underlying this webinar. We'll then go on to look at some of the terminology around search engine optimization, keywords, domains, title tags, meta descriptions, and we'll cover all of that, I think, in about 30 to 40 minutes. So there's a big caveat in terms of this webinar that there is a lot to know, and certainly more than we can cover in a 30 to 40 minute webinar. There are good books out there. We've found the book, How to Get to Top in Google by Exposure Ninja, very helpful. Sporting Bounce also uses something called SEMrush, which is a package that provides information on how many visits you get to your site, what particular keywords are important. Sporting Bounce is able to do that for daily updates we get, but also to look back over 2 years to see the trends. And certainly in the time over the last, I would say, 12 months or so that we've really focused in on understanding presence online and boosting our presence online, we've certainly seen substantial improvements. And SEMrush and that software and the data that provides has been particularly helpful to us. Now, SEMrush costs, and Sporting Bounce pays for that. There's also books, which obviously cost as well, but there's lots of free blogs and lots of free sources on the internet that are very helpful as well. So if you don't have much money to spend or don't want to spend much money, by the time that we'll have finished this webinar, you'll have a bit more of an understanding of some of the key things to consider. And there are lots of free resources out there that can be helpful in that regard. So certainly books are important in terms of lots of books and blogs and information out there. SEMrush is important. It tells you, what pages matter in your website, what are the keywords that matter in your particular discipline or domain, what keywords are helping your website get found, and so on. So does having an online presence matter? Now, there are over 40,000 Google searches per second. And I should say as well that in terms of this webinar, we're going to talk about Google. And Google is by far the most dominant search engine. Probably around 90%, it varies, and 90% of searches are done through Google. There are other search engines, of course, as well, Bing, for example. But broadly, the types of concepts, and things that we talk about in relation to Google will also apply to greater or lesser degrees, typically to other search engines as well. So does having an online presence matter? 40,000 Google searches per second probably should qualify. Not all of those are going to be for sports psychology or sports psychology services, but you probably knew that anyway. But certainly people do search for sports psychologists, online sports psychologists, sports psychology services. And some of those Google searches every second, small percentage of them will be for sports psychology services. Now, what type of people would search for sports psychologists and sports psychology consultants, certified mental performance consultants? What types of people would search for those individuals? Well, they'll be the types of people that you'd be familiar with. There'll be individuals who will be after support for themselves, after support for their children, after support for the clubs that they work for. And often, if we are searching or after someone, we will ask someone that we know. We'll say, look, do you know anybody who can offer sports psychology services? And for many of us who might be involved in professional sport, there will be a ready-built series of networks there that we can tap into. But not everyone is like that. Not everyone knows someone who has access to a sports psychologist or who knows of a sports psychologist they could recommend. And that's important. This social proof that we often rely on when we're after people to support us might not exist in a discipline like sports psychology, which is relatively smaller than other disciplines. But of course, even things that are quite common, like electricians and plumbers and carpenters, we often turn to Google, we often search online for individuals who can provide the services that we're after. Just 6 months ago, I was searching for an electrician to come and fit some extractor fans into our bathroom because we had some damp issues there. They didn't have any extractor fans. It's a tribute, I think, to three things that the pandemic, the global pandemic that's been going on, my project management skills, and also how busy the electricians are, that we will finally finish the job that has been started, not finished, in a couple of weeks' time. Fingers crossed. But certainly, I didn't know an electrician. I know a plumber, and I know some builders, but I didn't know an electrician. So the first thing I did was to search online. Now, of course, from one contact that you might get through an online search, that can lead to more contacts. Things can snowball from there. So each connection can lead to more opportunities. And personally, I've experienced that myself. I've had people that I've worked with who've recommended my services to other people. So from one connection, things can snowball. This social proof that I spoke about earlier, that when people are after something, the things that we rely on are other people's recommendations. And so if you've worked with someone and they speak to someone, and suddenly you get work that flows from that. So this social proof, this sort of deep-rooted psychological bias, if you like, is important. Normally rely on word of mouth for that, but of course word of mouth can come from initial connections that have been made online. So having an online presence matters, both to make connections now, but also to build up potential clients and potential opportunities in the future. So, as I mentioned earlier, it matters. People do search for sports psychologists, and globally, and this does differ slightly across countries, but globally, the most important search terms would be sports psychologist, sports psychology, broadly similar in terms of volume, then sports psychologist near me, then sports psychology consultant near me, and online sports psychologist. In this day of, or this era of technology, we genuinely thought online sports psychologists might be substantially higher, but actually it's really interesting that people actually want someone usually local to them. And of course, that they can make a connection local to them, and then they might engage in online consultancy and so on, building from that. But certainly it's more popular, or it's a more frequently searched term for people to search for sports psychologists near me. So people do search for sports psychology services. And the order of magnitude globally across countries tends to be sports psychology broadly similar, then sports psychologist near me, sports psychology consultant near me, and online sports psychologist. There are, of course, other related terms, mental coach, certified mental performance consultant, so on. But in terms of looking for a professional, sports psychologist near me tends to be the most popular one for a practitioner with a two broad terms, sports psychology. Sports psychologists are bigger than that. So there we are. We're probably 10 minutes in, and we're getting to the main point of the webinar: how to get found on Google. We're going to dig a little deeper into this, and again, as I mentioned, that we're going to focus in on Google as a search engine. The majority of searches that are done online are done through Google. Over 40,000 Google searches per second. Not all of them for sports psychology, but there's a lot of traffic. When I searched for my electrician, I went onto Google and said, electrician near me, electrician extractor fan near me. I'd like someone who takes 6 months to do it. I didn't have that particular search term in, although I may as well have done. So search engine optimization is something that you hear a lot of. It's how to it's really optimizing the content, the structure, and of your website so that you get found more easily. So search engine optimization, and that's SEO. And that's helping you get found through organic searches. I should say what organic searches is. That's where someone types in and looks for sports psychologists near me, and depending on where they are, and depending perhaps on maybe other search terms they put in, it will determine the website, the list of websites that come up. And as I'm sure you're aware, it really matters, it's really important to be on the first page of that Google search results. People tend to be a little lazy, and they will tend to only look, or tend to predominantly focus in on the first page. And even within that, there are substantial differences between individuals who get around first, around second, in terms of who then goes on to click on your website. So search engine optimization, think of it as fitness, think of it as getting your website fit and ready to be found by, and this is going to be crucial, the search terms that are relevant to you, your consultancy, and your specialism. So how does Google decide which of the millions of websites that it lists that it should throw up in response to that particular search, sports psychologist near me? Well, it will make the decision on a number of factors. Relevance. So is the website relevant? Does the website seem relevant to the particular search terms that the individual has put in? What about popularity and authority? So to determine relevance, by looking at the content of the website, looking at what's on the website in terms of videos, in terms of photographs, and in terms of text. In terms of popularity and authority, we'd look at how people have behaved in the past when they've gone onto that website for similar search terms. Have they, for example, spent a bit of time browsing on that website? In terms of authority, what sort of links does that website have to other relevant websites in the field, and vice versa? Do authoritative websites, particularly authoritative websites in that area, link back to that website? And then third, it's around quality. Is the website well maintained? Does it have lots of broken links? Are there lots of spelling errors? Is there a reasonable amount of text on the website? So it'll make a judgment on these three factors. So let's perhaps think of three websites that come up in response to a search. Sports psychology consultant near me. The first one Google throws up, people see, but they don't seem to click through to it. So you'll know in terms of title tags and meta descriptions, I'll talk a bit about those a bit later on. The bit of text you see in the Google search, people see it when it comes up in the Google search, but it doesn't seem that relevant to them. So they don't click through. Perhaps there's a second one that gets ranked highly. And people click on that, but they immediately see the person on there has no qualifications in sports psychology, and they immediately click off it. The third website is a website that's well maintained, has some relevant sports psychology articles in there that people spend a bit of time browsing that website and see the individual on there is well qualified and seems to have a substantial experience working in a number of different sports. And so they spend a bit of time browsing that website. So Google notes all of this and remembers this. It's not a real person, of course, but the algorithms work this out. And they will then, the next time that search is done, they will tend to favor which website? It'll be the third website. And that will tend to get ranked a little bit higher. So you can see how Google is consistently evaluating, ranking, and rating websites based on the way that individuals respond when they engage and use and interact with a particular website. And as I mentioned earlier, Sporting Bounce gets daily updates in terms of its rankings and where it's moving. And certainly over the last 12 months, since we've been understanding, and that's the first thing, understanding search engine optimization and understanding some of our key search terms, we've certainly seen in general an upward growth. Well, not in general, a complete upward growth over the last 12 months, but you get those individual daily fluctuations as Google is trying out various different combinations. So some key assumptions for this webinar. Really, we should have had this at the start, in fairness, that you have or planning to have a website. I mean, I guess that's partly where your interest is. Your website, very important to be mobile friendly, somewhat redundant term now really, given that the majority of searches will tend to be on mobile devices, that your website is sufficiently quick. I was reading a book, how the world is getting faster, and finished that recently. Very, very good book. And they talked about Google in 1999. They found that a website would lose a third of its traffic if it would take 8 seconds to load. In 2006, it was 4 seconds. And now Google puts a website on notice if it takes 2 seconds to load. So people are searching for information and they want that information quickly. And if the website doesn't load, they get a bit frustrated, and they will move on to search something else. And also that you're able to easily alter the content and structure of your website. So if there's something that we talk about here that makes sense, you'd like to be able to go back and make some of those changes. So in terms of I think what was one of the most important things that we understood was around identifying some of the keywords. Now, keywords are the words that we type into search engines. You know, these are the keywords that we're looking for, and this is important because it really gets the heart of, you know, what do you want to get found for? That is, when people type something into Google, do you want to get found by people who are searching for sports psychologist hypnosis? Or do you want to get found for sports psychologist help with injury rehabilitation? Or sports psychologist near me, or perhaps sports psychologist New York, sports psychologist Los Angeles, or sports psychologist Cardiff? All of these things, it might be some or all of those things. So it's important to identify or think about what you want to get found for. It's also useful, if you have your own website, to understand how you are found. So those are almost two separate things. You'd like them to be one thing, and that's certainly the goal, that you want to get found for the keywords that really tie into your expertise and specialism and are important for you. If you work as a sports psychologist in New York, when people type in sports psychologist in New York, you would like your website to be found and to come up, for people to click on that website, spend some time there, and contact you through that website. Just very quickly, this is a shameful and shameless plug in many ways, that Sporting Bounce does have a product, a report, if you like, that can give you some information on where you rank in relation to your competitors, how you are found, how your number of visitors has changed over the last 12 months, what are some of your keywords, and how do they compare to some of the key competitors in your field. You can get similar types of information for free using Google Search Console and so on, but certainly there's a report that you can get through Sporting Bounce that will give you that in a nice package, a little bit more than you might get through the Google Search Console, but it's all contained into one report. You could also use a service like SEMrush to find some of the keywords, and that was important to us because, you know, certainly in terms of thinking around something like online sports psychologist, it's certainly searched for a lot less than sports psychologist near me, and that's important because it gives you an indication of perhaps how you can drive greater traffic to your site by focusing on some of those keywords that have larger amounts of traffic associated with them. It's important to think strategically as well, though, related to that, because there are some keywords that are searched for frequently, but there are also some keywords that are very difficult to rank highly for. So, for example, anxiety in sport, more people search for anxiety in sport compared with hypnosis for sport performance anxiety. However, it is easier to rank higher, and remember that ranking on the first page of Google or as high as you possibly can is important. It is easier to rank higher in hypnosis for sports performance anxiety. So there's always a trade-off that's worth considering about the types of keywords that you target. So there are certainly some keywords that lots of people search for, sports psychologist, for example. But perhaps fewer people might search for sports psychologist New York. Well, there certainly will be fewer people searching for that, or sports psychologist in a location like Cardiff, New York, Los Angeles, London. So it is easier to rank higher, typically in those keywords. So for example, if you were hypnosis was one of your skills and you offered that as an intervention, and you certainly worked with individuals who experienced anxiety, you might say, well, actually, I'd want to make sure that in terms of hypnosis for sport performance anxiety, I'd like to rank highly for that, and I'll make that a focus. And one of the reasons I will make that a focus is because I can get to the top higher or quicker or easier for hypnosis for sport performance anxiety than I can do for anxiety in sport. And there's another product again that we have on Sporting Bounce that might be of interest. You know, it identifies the keywords in your particular area. So we can say, well, okay, if you want to search for hypnosis for sports performance anxiety, we'll give you an indication of what the people who rank highest in that have on their websites. It would say what some of the key terms you should include in your content should be when you write your content for a particular web page that's focused on hypnosis for sports performance anxiety. So I've got the feeling I explained that very badly, but it really gives you a guide for what you should write or what you should include in your content for a particular search term, whether it's anxiety in sport or hypnosis for sports performance anxiety. And it shows what all the competitors, the people who rank on the first page, the top 10 returned websites have included in terms of their text, and also provides suggestions for what you should include on your page, as well as what other people have included. You can look at that and you can say, well, actually, that gives me a real good understanding of these people are ranking highly. This is what I should include. This is the type of content I should produce for my website. To remember, relevance is important in terms of Google deciding whether to rank you highly or not. So we've touched on a few sort of key issues. I'm going to move on to domains and URLs now. And one thing to say is to include your keywords in your URL where possible. So you can see this is an individual who lists on our site, and you can see that actually for this URL we have location, United Kingdom, Glasgow, and sports psychologist, and then the name of the person. So we're covering what we think are some of this. So anybody who looks for a sports psychologist in Glasgow, you would expect to see this particular profile returned highly. And just a quick mention about the profiles on Sporting Bounces. They act very much as individual websites, and the people who list on the directory are able to alter and add as much content as they want to that particular profile. And then we work with individuals if they have any particular comments in terms of their URL or their meta titles and their titles rather, and meta descriptions in terms of how that shows up in Google. We're happy to work with individuals in that regard. So you can see we've included some of the most important things in this particular URL, and that's important for Google. Now, the clever ones amongst you, which is all of you, will realize that sportingbounce.com is a directory of sports psychology consultants, but within its domain name includes none of those particular words, which in many ways might be a little oversight, but it gives you an indication that these things can be important, but are not the be-all and end-all. And you'll see that actually, I'll talk a little bit about this coming up. You can see that in our meta title, which is our title tags here, we have find a sports psychologist near you and sports psychology directory, and then our meta description, we emphasize some of the key bits of text that are crucial to drive people to our site. So these things are important, but even people looking for a phone will end up on Apple's website, and Apple doesn't have a website that says iPhonesnearyou.com. So domains matter, but it's not the be all and end all. URLs matter, not the be all and end all. But where you can, try to get everything as try to get as many strings to your bow as is possible. One of the debates around the homepage was, what types of keywords do you want to drive to your homepage? And certainly, I think one of the discussions early on, we had lots of key search terms that we thought were being driven towards the homepage: online sports psychologist near you, sports psychology consultant near you, and many others. And I think it sometimes helps actually to set up separate web pages or separate pages that have the specific key search terms you have identified. So rather than having online sports psychologists going to the homepage, we set up a unique URL for that. And sometimes these changes can take a while to come through. It could take between 4 days or couple of days through to about 6 months for Google to pick this up. There seems to be a bit of variation actually, and in terms of how long things take to get picked up by Google. So you might make a change, but the change doesn't happen immediately. And of course as well, if you do have a very well established website that does rank highly, be very, very cautious about making changes to particularly your homepage and some of the other pages that are ranking highly for you, because you might find yourself going down a bit before you come back up again. And if you are ranking highly, then certainly probably best to leave as it is. So I've talked a bit about title tags and meta descriptions. So here's someone who lists on our site. You can see the title tag there. Now we typically have between around about 57 characters for the title tag, so you have to be quite concise with the title tag. So you can see you've got the name of the person, the discipline, sports psychologist, Glasgow, big competition going on in Glasgow, as you can see, for sports psychology services, and the UK. So this is our title tag here, 57 characters. We've added the website in there as well. And then for the meta description, the meta description should be between 155 to 160 characters. Now, this does not contribute necessarily to the ranking, but it is important because it's what people will read to decide whether they go on and click on this particular website. So we try to be concise, but we try to write it in a way that that encourages people to go on to the click on the link and find out a bit more. And so certainly you want to give as much detail as you can to help drive individuals through and click on the link. So it is actually probably a bit more important than certainly I thought of initially, but certainly the meta description matters because it's the way you get people to click on the link. You can see here's another meta description and title tag, and you can see we've been perhaps a little bit less concise here, and you can see that Google has constricted what we've written. So Amanda Ferranti is one of our lists on our site as a certified mental performance consultant. You can see that we've got the location there twice, but haven't got any information in the title tag relating to the disability. It is there, it is in the title tag, but Google has shown not to display it. So it's kind of weird because I think if you include it in the title tag, it does get count towards rankings, but sometimes it doesn't get displayed. And then we have a description here about the profile, but again, it's truncated it, so we haven't got that call to action there to encourage people to click on the website and view the profile for more details. So 57 characters. Thereabouts for the title tag, and 155 to 160 for the meta description. But for the people who list on Sporting Bounce, what about happy to look at the title tag and meta descriptions to make sure that they are happy with how they are displayed. So, spoken quite a bit about how we might get ranked highly. And I've talked a lot about content, but haven't really mentioned this in much detail. One of the key things about content is to include the keywords in your text. So I think what's really important is that you understand what keywords you are trying to target. And these things can get a bit apocryphal, and you never know if they're entirely true or not. But there's a suggestion that you should include whatever keyword you're aiming for around 3 times within the text, certainly within your title and meta description as well. Now, it's a bit like I used to use hypnosis quite a bit as an intervention, and they used to say that, when giving the suggestions after the induction, that you should aim for a bit of a rule of 3 with hypnosis, that you'd certainly have your suggestions repeated 3 times, usually slightly differently as well, so to keep that novelty, if you like. I remember working with a martial artist who wanted to feel heavy hands when he was fighting, so heavy hands was the suggestion, and really build that into the hypnosis script. So include the keywords in your text. Now, how much you write also matters, and I'm a bit torn on this. I mean, certainly you'd say more than 300 words, and for individuals who've got their profile on Sporting Bounce, it's encouraged they write at least 300 words. You include the words like sports psychologist, include the words related to the location as well, because that's important, because the individual profiles on Sporting Bounce act as a separate website, if you like, and they show up individually within different search terms. So include the keywords in your text. Ideally, more than 500 words. That's great. I mean, certainly for blogs and so on, you tend to see the longer, well-written, more in-depth blogs will tend to get picked up more often. And make sure the readability of your page is good with short instead of long paragraphs. Good use of subheadings and media like photographs and video are important. You can link to authoritative sources within your content. That's great as well. I suppose in terms of content, the more the better. More frequent, quality and amount is great. Novelty is important as well. And I think, we've all been in situations where we'd like to get bigger bang for our buck, if you like. And if we've written a particular article that has appeared somewhere, then maybe I can just cut and paste that and post it into this profile. But really, that doesn't work so well, because of course Google, not a person, but it remembers, the algorithm remembers where it first appeared, and you get very little credit. And of course, if you did that repeatedly and there was lots of content that was just cut and pasted from various different sources, then it could actually harm your rankings. So in terms of content, novelty matters. Just in the same way that don't include the keywords in the same way every single time in your text. Include them in different contexts. Novelty, new content, fresh content that Google hasn't come across before is really important. So where to next, really? I think taking a bit of, probably flown through that a little bit quicker than I'd intended. It might have dragged for you. Who knows? But we've certainly gone through that pretty quickly. Where to next? I think, look, it'd be great if you could visit the website, Sporting Bounce, have a look and browse through that. There were, as I mentioned, shamefully and shamelessly, I suspect as well, we have some products that can be helpful in that regard, but it would be remiss of me not to say as well that you can pick some of these up for free in various bits and pieces around the web. What we do is Sporting Bounce uses SEMrush as a way of generating the reports for your specific website, and does that in a nice, concise manner, both in terms of how your website's performing, who your competitors are, and how you rank compared to them. What are the keywords that you do particularly well in? And there's also a product as well that enables you to identify, if you want to go after a particular keyword, who are the best ranking in that particular keyword, what are they written, what you need to do to generate a page that could help you rank highly in that keyword. In terms of some of the things that we've covered, we've talked about relevance, we've talked about the importance of content. It was the last thing we finished, but very important. Then also thinking about your URLs, thinking about your title tags, thinking about your meta descriptions, which are probably not important in terms of ranking, but are important in terms of getting people then to click on the link and visit your site. So we hope this has been helpful. There are plenty of excellent free resources that can help, that will supplement what we've covered here today. So as I mentioned, we talk about title, we talk about meta description, we talk about content, the need for quality and the need for novelty. Fresh content is important. So thank you very much for your time and your patience. If you've made it this far, we're genuinely grateful for that. So just a quick recap, it's about how do you get found? How are you trying to get found? And what can you do to get found? And we really hope that some of the very brief overview that we've covered today has been helpful in that regard. Remember the caveat, it is a very brief overview. There is much more to learn and to know, but we hope that some of these fundamentals and some of these building blocks that you have found useful. Thank you very much.